Alessandro Moretti, New York's most feared capo, entered L'Étoile Noire, and the entire room froze. Everyone watched the man who owned the skyline. But his date made a fatal mistake. She laughed at the waitress. Pointing at the wine list, she sneered, "She can't even read the menu, Alessandro. It's pathetic." She didn't know this waitress held a secret that could burn their empire to the ground. When Sophie finally spoke, she didn't just read the menu. She silenced the devil himself. This is the shocking story of how a spilled glass of red wine had truly changed the underworld forever. The rain in Manhattan didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Inside L'Étoile Noire, however, the weather was irrelevant. The air here smelled of old money, truffle oil, and fear. Sophie delicately adjusted the silverware on table 4, her fingers trembling just slightly. It wasn't the cold. It was the hunger. She hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days, surviving on the stale baguettes the sous-chef, Jean-Luc, threw out the back door at midnight. To the patrons of L'Étoile, Sophie was part of the furniture, a blur of black fabric and white apron, a ghost with a notepad. "Check your reflection, Sophie," the maitre d', Monsieur Laurent, hissed as he glided past. "Table 4 is reserved. The Moretti party." The name dropped the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Sophie stiffened. Everyone in New York knew the Morettis. They didn't just run the unions or the docks anymore. They owned the skyline. Alessandro Moretti, the family's youngest and most ruthless don, was a man whose whisper was louder than a gunshot. He was known for 2 things: his terrifying silence and his taste for perfection. "I'm ready, monsieur," Sophie whispered, tucking a stray lock of honey-blonde hair behind her ear. She kept her eyes down. That was the rule. Look down, stay alive. At 8 p.m. sharp, the heavy oak doors swung open. The restaurant, usually a hum of polite conversation and clinking crystal, fell dead silent. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Alessandro Moretti walked in first. He was taller than he looked in the paparazzi photos, wearing a charcoal bespoke suit that likely cost more than Sophie's entire life earnings. His face was a mask of bored indifference, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, his eyes dark, intelligent, and completely devoid of warmth. Behind him trailed 2 bodyguards, hulking men who looked like they were carved from granite, and a woman. The woman was stunning, in the way a diamond is stunning, cold, hard, and designed to be looked at. She wore a red dress that clung to her like a second skin. This was Camilla Vance. No, wait, not Vance. Camilla Russo, a socialite desperate to secure a ring on her finger before the fiscal quarter ended. "This way, signore." Laurent bowed so low his nose nearly brushed the carpet. They were seated at table 4, Sophie's station. She waited the requisite 30 seconds before approaching. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She needed this job. She needed the tips. Her rent was 3 weeks late, and her landlord, a sweaty man named Mr. Henderson, had threatened to change the locks by Friday. "Good evening," Sophie said, her voice soft but steady. "Water for the table?" Alessandro didn't look up. He was checking his watch, a vintage Patek Philippe. He waved a hand dismissively. Camilla, however, looked up. Her eyes scanned Sophie from her scuffed shoes to her frayed collar, her lip curling in immediate distaste. To Camilla, Sophie wasn't a person. She was an obstacle to Alessandro's attention. "Sparkling," Camilla snapped. "And bring the wine list, the reserve list, not the house garbage." "Certainly, madame." "Bilbo." Sophie moved to fetch the heavy leather-bound book. When she returned, she placed it gently in front of Alessandro. He ignored it. "Read it for me, darling," he said to Camilla, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated in Sophie's chest. "I have a headache." Camilla preened. She opened the book, her manicured nails tapping against the parchment. But as her eyes scanned the pages, her smile faltered. The menu at L'Étoile Noire was not merely French, it was archaic, pretentious French, handwritten in cursive script, detailing vintages and regions that required a sommelier's certification to decipher. Camilla squinted. She flipped a page, then another. She laughed nervously. "Well," Camilla giggled, tossing her hair, "it's all just French, isn't it? Alessandro, why don't we just order the Cabernet?" "I don't want a Cabernet," Alessandro said, finally looking up. His eyes bored into Camilla. "I want the 82 Bordeaux. Find it." Camilla panic-scanned the page. She pointed at a random line. "Here, this one." Sophie leaned in to pour the water. Her eyes inadvertently flicked to where Camilla was pointing. It wasn't a Bordeaux. It was a cheap table wine from the Loire Valley, marked up for tourists. "Actually," Camilla snapped, catching Sophie's glance. She felt foolish, and she needed a target. "Why don't you ask her? Look at her." Camilla laughed, a cruel, tinkling sound that carried across the silent restaurant. "She's staring at the page like she's trying to solve a math problem. She probably can't even read the menu, Alessandro. It's pathetic. These places hire anyone off the street nowadays." The restaurant went quiet. Nearby diners froze, forks hovering halfway to their mouths. Alessandro shifted in his seat. He looked at Sophie for the first time. Really looked at her. He saw the fraying cuffs, the tired eyes, the cheap shoes. "Is that true?" Alessandro asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Can you not read the menu?" It was a trap. If she said yes, she was incompetent. If she said no, she was arguing with a guest. A death sentence in the service industry. Camilla smirked, triumphant. "Of course she can't. Go get someone who knows what they're doing. Shoo!" Sophie froze. The insult burned, hot and white in her stomach. It wasn't the cruelty that stung. It was the assumption of her stupidity. They saw a waitress. They saw a nobody. They didn't see Sophie Dubois, former prodigy of the Sorbonne, daughter of a disgraced diplomat, who had spent her childhood summers in the vineyards of Provence before her father's gambling debts forced them into hiding in America. Sophie gripped the water pitcher tight. She should walk away. She should get Laurent. But then she looked at Alessandro. He wasn't sneering like Camilla. He was watching her with a curious, predatory intensity. He was waiting to see if she would break. Sophie took a breath. She set the pitcher down. The sound was a soft thud on the tablecloth. She turned to Camilla, her posture straightening. The submissive slouch vanished. "Mademoiselle pointe vers une muscadet Sèvres et Maine," Sophie said. Her voice had changed. The shaky American accent was gone, replaced by the crisp, melodic, and authoritative cadence of a native Parisian. Camilla blinked. "What?" Sophie continued, her eyes locking onto Alessandro's. She spoke in French, but the fluidity was so perfect it sounded like music. "It is a dry white wine, acidic, typically paired with oysters. It is certainly not a Bordeaux. If Monsieur desires the 1982, he is looking for the Chateau Mouton Rothschild on page 14, third line, from the bottom." She reached over, her hand steady, and flipped the heavy pages of the wine list with a single graceful motion. She landed exactly on page 14. Furthermore, Sophie switched to flawless, unaccented English, her voice cool and professional. "The vintage you were pointing at, mademoiselle, is corked. Monsieur Laurent keeps it on the list only to test the tourists. I would never serve it to a palate as refined as Mr. Moretti's." Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Monsieur Laurent, who had rushed over to intervene, skidded to a halt, his mouth agape. Camilla's face turned a violent shade of crimson. She sputtered, How dare you speak to me like—" Alessandro raised his hand. One finger. Camilla snapped her mouth shut instantly. Alessandro slowly turned his gaze from the wine list to Sophie. The boredom was gone from his eyes. In its place was something much more dangerous. Interest. "You speak French," Alessandro stated. It wasn't a question. "I do," Sophie replied, meeting his gaze. She knew she was likely fired. She didn't care. "And you know wine." "I know that serving a muscadet with a steak would be a crime against humanity, signore. A corner of Alessandro's mouth twitched. It was almost a smile. "What is your name?" "Sophie." "Sophie." He tested the name, rolling it around his tongue like a sip of whiskey. "You're not from Brooklyn, are you, Sophie?" "Everyone is from somewhere, Mr. Moretti. Right now, I am simply from table 4. Alessandro stared at her for a long, heavy moment. Then he closed the wine list. "Get the Rothschild," he commanded, never breaking eye contact with her, "and bring another glass." Camilla perked up. "Oh, Alessandro, you're too kind. Not for you," Alessandro said coldly, cutting her off. He gestured to the empty seat across from him. The seat next to Camilla. "For her." He pointed at Sophie. "Sit down, Sophie." The entire restaurant gasped. A waitress sitting with the Don? It was unheard of. It was suicide. "Sir, I cannot," Sophie stammered, the adrenaline fading into fear. "My shift. Monsieur Laurent will fire me." Alessandro turned his head slightly to the terrifyingly pale manager standing 5 feet away. "Laurent," Alessandro said calmly, "Sophie is finished with her shift. She is dining with me. Put it on my tab, and if she is fired, L'Étoile Noire will burn down by morning. Capiche?" Laurent nodded so hard his glasses nearly fell off. Yes, Mr. Moretti, of course. Sophie, please, sit." Sophie looked at the chair, then at the furious, humiliated Camilla, then at the dark, abyssal eyes of Alessandro Moretti. She sat down, and that was the moment her life ended, and the moment it truly began. The chair was velvet, soft and expensive, contrasting sharply with the stiff wooden stool Sophie usually perched on in the break room to eat her stale bread. But she couldn't feel the velvet. She could only feel the weight of Alessandro Moretti's stare. It was heavy, physical, like a hand around her throat. Across the table, Camilla Russo looked as though she had swallowed a lemon whole. Her face was a mask of crumbling foundation and pure, unadulterated rage. "Alessandro," Camilla hissed, her voice trembling. "This is a joke, right? A test? You're letting the help sit at our table?" Alessandro didn't look at her. He watched Sophie. "Pour the wine, Sophie." Sophie's hands shook as she reached for the bottle of Chateau Mouton Rothschild. It was a 1982 vintage, worth more than 3 months of her rent. She decanted it with practiced ease, the muscle memory of her past life taking over. She poured a splash for Alessandro to taste. He swirled the dark crimson liquid, inhaled deeply, and took a sip. He nodded. Sophie filled his glass, then filled her own. She did not fill Camilla's. "You're ignoring me!" Camilla shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. The silverware rattled. "I am the daughter of Senator Russo. My father will—" "Your father," Alessandro interrupted, his voice low and bored, "owes me 3 favors and $4 million. If I told him I left you on the curb because you were annoying me, he would likely apologize to me for the inconvenience." Camilla's mouth fell open. "Sophie," Alessandro continued, turning his attention back to the waitress, "tell me about the wine." Sophie took a sip. The taste hit her palate like a memory. Blackcurrant, cedar, cigar box. It tasted like her father's study before the police raids. It tasted like safety. "It's bold," Sophie said softly. "Structure is impeccable. The tannins have softened with age, but they still have grip. It has a long finish. It's a survivor." "A survivor," Alessandro repeated. "Like you?" Sophie lowered her glass. "I don't know what you mean, sir." "Please," Camilla scoffed, standing up. She grabbed her clutch, her knuckles white. "I'm not staying for this charade. You want to eat with the rat? Fine. Catch fleas." She turned to storm out, but not before grabbing her glass of water. With a vindictive sneer, she tossed the contents at Sophie. It happened in slow motion. Sophie flinched, closing her eyes, expecting the icy shock. It never came. She opened her eyes. Alessandro had moved with a speed that defied logic. His hand was up, blocking the spray. The water dripped from his expensive suit jacket sleeve onto the tablecloth. He hadn't spilled a drop of his wine. The restaurant went dead silent again. Even the kitchen noise stopped. Alessandro slowly stood up. He peeled off his wet jacket and handed it to one of his granite-faced bodyguards. Then he looked at Camilla. "Leave," he whispered. It wasn't a shout. It was a sound like a coffin lid closing. Camilla turned pale, realizing she had just assaulted a capo. She turned and ran, her heels clicking frantically against the hardwood floor until she vanished into the rainy night. Alessandro sat back down. He was in his dress shirt now, the white fabric straining against broad shoulders, a gun holster clearly visible under his left arm. He didn't bother to hide it. "Apologies," he said to Sophie. "The trash has been taken out." Sophie stared at him. "Why did you do that?" "Because you know the difference between a Muscadet and a Bordeaux," he said, cutting into his steak, "and because you have the eyes of a woman who is running from something, and I hate wasted potential." He took a bite of steak, chewed slowly, and then pointed his fork at her. "Eat. You look like you haven't seen a protein in a week." Sophie picked up her fork. She was starving. The smell of the ribeye was intoxicating. She took a bite, suppressing a moan of pleasure. "So," Alessandro said, swirling his wine. "Sophie, no last name, perfect French, knowledge of high-end vintages, working a dead-end job in a place where the manager terrifies you. Let me guess." He leaned in, his dark eyes narrowing. "Disgraced socialite?" "No, you're too tough for that." "Runaway wife?" "No, no ring mark on your finger." "That leaves family trouble." Sophie froze. She set her fork down. "I'm just a waitress, Mr. Moretti." "Liar," he smiled. It was a wolfish smile showing perfect white teeth. "You're Arthur Dubois' daughter." The glass slipped from Sophie's fingers. It hit the table, shattering. Red wine, the expensive 1982 Rothschild, bled across the white tablecloth like a gunshot wound. "How?" Sophie whispered, her blood running cold. "How do you know that name?" "Your father was a legend in the smuggling circles," Alessandro said, unbothered by the mess. He signaled Laurent for a napkin. He moved art, gems, information. The diplomat, they called him. Then 3 years ago he vanished with something very valuable, something that didn't belong to him. Alessandro's expression hardened. Something that belonged to the Moretti family. Sophie pushed her chair back, panic clawing at her throat. "I don't know where he is. I haven't seen him in 3 years. Please, I just want to go home." "You can't go home, Sophie," Alessandro said softly. "Why not?" "Because if I found you," he nodded toward the window, where dark SUVs were idling in the rain, "then Stefano Greco found you too. And unlike me, Greco doesn't like wine. He likes blood." As if on cue, the front window of L'Étoile Noire shattered inward. The sound wasn't a crash. It was an explosion of crystal. Shards of glass sprayed across the dining room like diamond dust. Screams erupted. Patrons dove under tables. Sophie didn't have time to scream. Before her brain could process the drive-by shooting, a heavy weight slammed into her, knocking her chair backward. Alessandro was on top of her, shielding her body with his own. She felt the hard heat of his chest, the smell of gunpowder and expensive cologne filling her nose. Pop, 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 pop. Bullets shredded the velvet upholstery of the booth where they had been sitting seconds ago. Bottles behind the bar exploded, raining liquor and glass onto the cowering bartender. "Stay down!" Alessandro roared, his voice commandingly loud, cutting through the chaos. He pulled his gun, a sleek, matte black pistol, from his holster. He fired 3 shots toward the broken window, calculated and calm, suppressing the attackers outside. "Dante, the back!" Alessandro barked. One of the bodyguards, the one called Dante, was already moving, flipping a table for cover and returning fire. Sophie was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. "What is happening? Who are they?" "Greco!" Alessandro spat. He looked down at her, his face inches from hers. There was a smear of blood on his cheek, a small cut from flying glass. "He wants you. He thinks you have the key." "The key to what? I don't have anything," Sophie cried, tears mixing with the dust on her face. "We move, now!" Alessandro grabbed her arm. His grip was iron. He hauled her up, keeping her low, bent double as they ran towards the kitchen. They burst through the swinging doors, startling the chefs. "Out the back! Go!" Alessandro ordered the staff. They didn't need telling twice. The kitchen brigade fled into the alleyway. Alessandro dragged Sophie through the steam and grease of the kitchen, out the heavy steel rear door, and into the rain-slicked alley. A black armored SUV screeched to a halt in front of them. The door slid open. "Get in!" Alessandro shoved her inside and dove in after her. The tires squealed, smoking against the asphalt, as the car peeled away just as a motorcycle turned the corner, the rider raising a submachine gun. Bullets pinged harmlessly off the reinforced glass of the SUV. Sophie sat huddled in the corner of the leather seat, hugging her knees. She was soaked, shivering and in shock. Alessandro sat opposite her. He holstered his gun and straightened his cuffs. He looked annoyingly calm, as if he had just left a boring business meeting rather than a shootout. "Are you hit?" he asked. Sophie checked herself. No, I don't think so." She looked at him. "You're bleeding." Alessandro touched his cheek, looking at the blood on his fingertips. "It's nothing." He opened a compartment in the armrest and pulled out a bottle of water and a towel. He tossed them to her. "Clean up. You look like a ghost." Sophie wiped her face. You said they want the key." "What key?" "My father left us with nothing but debt. We lost the vineyard, the flat in Paris, everything. I've been waiting tables for 2 years just to keep a roof over my head." Alessandro watched her, analyzing her micro-expressions. He was a human lie detector, trained by the harshest masters in the underworld. He saw fear, confusion, and exhaustion. He didn't see deception. Arthur didn't just steal money, Sophie. He stole a ledger, an encrypted drive containing the routing numbers for the entire East Coast Syndicate's offshore accounts. Greco wants it to take over the city. I want it to stop him. "I don't have it," Sophie insisted. "Maybe not knowingly," Alessandro said. "But Arthur was a sentimental fool. He would have hidden it somewhere close to you, somewhere safe." The car slowed down. Sophie looked out the window. They weren't in Manhattan anymore. They were crossing a bridge, heading toward the darker, industrial outlines of the docks. But then the car veered toward a high-rise looming over the river. "Where are we going?" "My place," Alessandro said. "No," Sophie panicked. "Take me to my apartment. I need my things. My mother's locket is there." Alessandro sighed. He tapped the partition. "Driver, detour to Queens, 42nd Street." "Sir, it's not safe." The driver, a man with a thick neck, rumbled. "Do it," Alessandro commanded. The ride to Queens was silent. When they pulled up to Sophie's building, a crumbling brick tenement with peeling paint, Alessandro signaled his men to wait. "I'm coming up with you," he said. "I can pack my own bag," Sophie snapped, trying to reclaim a shred of dignity. "Sophie," Alessandro said, his voice dropping an octave, "look at your door." Sophie looked up at the second-floor window. The light was on. She never left the light on. She bolted out of the car. "Sophie, wait!" Alessandro cursed and ran after her. Sophie took the stairs 2 at a time. She reached her door. The lock was busted. The wood splintered around the frame. She pushed it open. Her scream died in her throat. The apartment had been eviscerated. The mattress was slashed open, stuffing spilling out like guts. The cheap dresser was smashed. Her clothes were torn and scattered. The floorboards had been pried up. Even the wallpaper was peeling. "No!" she whimpered. She fell to her knees, crawling through the debris. "No, no, no!" She reached under the broken remains of her bed, feeling for a loose floorboard she used as a safe. It was empty. "The locket!" she sobbed. "They took the locket. It had the only picture of my mother inside." Alessandro stepped into the room. He surveyed the destruction with a cold, calculating gaze. This was Greco's work. Messy, brutal, loud. He walked over to where Sophie was kneeling in the ruins of her life. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't say, "It will be okay." He crouched down, his expensive suit trousers touching the dirty floor. He reached out and lifted her chin, so she had to look at him. "They didn't find what they were looking for," Alessandro said. "They took everything," Sophie cried. "They took trash and trinkets. If they had found the drive, they would have burned this building down to cover their tracks. They are still hunting." He stood up and extended a hand to her. "You have nothing left here, Sophie. No job, no home, no past." Sophie looked at his hand. It was large, calloused, and steady. The hand of a killer. But right now, it was the only thing in the world that wasn't broken. "Come with me," Alessandro said. "I will get your locket back. I will get your father's debt settled. But you have to belong to me, now." "Belong to you," Sophie whispered. "Like a possession?" "Like a partner," Alessandro corrected. "I need your brain. You need my protection. Until Greco is dead, you are Sophie Moretti." Sophie hesitated. Then, as the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, she placed her hand in his. He pulled her up, pulled her close, and for a brief second, she felt safe. "Let's go home," he said. The penthouse was not a home. It was a fortress in the sky. The elevator opened directly into a living room that was larger than Sophie's entire apartment building. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls looked out over the glittering expanse of Manhattan. The furniture was modern, Italian, and stark. Everything was black, white, or chrome. It was beautiful, cold, and utterly masculine. "Dante," Alessandro barked as they walked in. "Secure the perimeter. Double the guard in the lobby. No one comes up unless I authorize it. Tell the chef to prepare something, light, and get a doctor." "I don't need a doctor," Sophie said, hugging herself. She was still wearing her waitress uniform, now stained with wine and dust. She felt ridiculously out of place. "You have cuts on your arms from the glass," Alessandro said, loosening his tie. He walked to a wet bar and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He walked back and handed one to her. "Brandy. Drink." Sophie took a sip. It burned, but it settled her nerves. "There is a guest room down the hall," Alessandro gestured. "There are clothes in the closet. My sister's old things. She leaves them here. They should fit. Shower, change. Then come to my study." "And if I refuse?" Sophie asked, a spark of her defiance returning. Alessandro paused. He looked at her with that intensity that made her knees weak. "The door is unlocked, Sophie. You can leave any time. But out there, you are prey. In here, you are a guest. Choose." He turned and walked toward a set of heavy double doors, leaving her alone in the massive room. Sophie stared at the elevator. She could run. She could go to the police. But the police were likely on Greco's payroll, or Alessandro's. Her father had taught her that much. "There is no law," Arthur used to say. "Only power." She turned and went to the guest room. The shower was a waterfall of hot water that washed away the grime of the restaurant and the dust of her destroyed apartment. She scrubbed her skin until it was pink. She stepped out and found the clothes Alessandro mentioned. Silk blouses, cashmere sweaters. She chose a simple, oversized white shirt and black leggings. She looked in the mirror. The girl staring back looked different, harder. She walked to the study. The doors were open. Inside, the room was lined with books. Alessandro was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, surrounded by monitors and stacks of paper. He had changed into a black t-shirt, revealing muscular arms covered in tattoos, intricate ink that looked like vines and thorns wrapping around his biceps. "Better," he said, not looking up from a document. "You said you needed my brain," Sophie said, standing in front of the desk. "I assume you don't need me to recite wine vintages." Alessandro slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was old, yellowed, and covered in handwritten cipher. "This is a letter your father sent to me 3 days before he vanished," Alessandro said. "We intercepted it, but we never cracked it. My cryptographers say it's gibberish. Random French poetry." Sophie picked up the paper. Her breath hitched. She recognized the handwriting immediately. The looping L's, the sharp T's. "It's not random," she whispered. "Read it." "None." Sophie scanned the text. "Le clair de lune brille sur le vignoble oubli en là où le renard dort sous la neuvième pierre." "The moonlight shines on the forgotten vineyard, where the fox sleeps under the 9th stone," she translated. "We know what it says in English," Alessandro said impatiently, "but it means nothing. There is no vineyard, no fox." "It's a book code," Sophie said, her mind racing back to her childhood. "My father, he used to read me specific stories. The Little Prince, Les Miserables. But this," she tapped the paper, "the fox refers to Aesop's fables, the 1890 edition. He had a first edition in his library." Alessandro stood up. "And the 9th stone, page 9, or the 9th fable, the fox and the grapes." Sophie looked up at Alessandro. "He wasn't telling you where the money was. He was telling you where the key is." "Where?" Alessandro demanded, leaning over the desk. "The forgotten vineyard," Sophie mused. She closed her eyes. "When I was 10, we buried a time capsule in the old vineyard in Provence. Before we lost the estate, we buried it under the 9th stone of the garden wall." Alessandro's eyes widened. "Provence, the drive is in France." "If he didn't move it," Sophie said. "We have to go," Alessandro said instantly. He hit a button on his desk phone. "Dante, prep the jet. We leave for Marseille in 1 hour." "Wait," Sophie cried. "I'm not going to France with you. I'm wanted by the French authorities for my father's debts." Alessandro walked around the desk. He stopped inches from her. The air between them crackled with electricity. "I own the French customs at Marseille," he said. "You won't be arrested, but you are the only one who can find that stone. You are the only one who knows the layout of the estate." He reached out and tucked a wet strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, at odds with the violence of the night. "Help me find the drive, Sophie. Help me destroy Greco, and I will give you your life back. I will clear your debts. I will buy you l'Étoile Noire if you want it." "I don't want the restaurant," Sophie said breathlessly. "I want my father." Alessandro's face shadowed. He looked away for a split second, a hesitation that Sophie caught. "What?" she asked sharply. "What aren't you telling me?" "Sophie, is he dead?" Her voice cracked. "Tell me." Alessandro grabbed her shoulders. "He's not dead, but he isn't missing, Sophie. He didn't run away." "Then where is he?" Alessandro took a deep breath. "He's in the dungeon of Stefano Greco's villa in Tuscany. He's been there for 3 years. The letter, it wasn't sent before he vanished. It was smuggled out last week." Sophie's world tilted. He's alive? And you knew?" "I suspected. The letter confirmed it." "We have to get him," Sophie shouted, pulling away. "Forget the drive. We have to save him." "We can't save him without the drive," Alessandro roared back. "Greco is holding him as leverage to get the codes. If we storm the villa, he kills Arthur. If we give him the drive, he kills Arthur. The only way is to get the drive first, decode the accounts, and freeze Greco's assets. If we bankrupt him, his army leaves. Then we go in." Sophie stared at him, her chest heaving. The stakes had just skyrocketed. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about her father's life. She looked at the man standing before her, the mafia don, the monster. He was her only hope. "France," Sophie said, her voice steel. "We go to France." Alessandro nodded. "Get your coat." As Sophie turned to leave, she noticed a file on the corner of his desk. It was half open. She saw a photo clipped to the front. It was a photo of her, taken from across the street of l'Étoile Noire 2 weeks ago. She froze. "You knew?" she whispered. She turned back to him, betrayal stinging her eyes. "You didn't come to the restaurant for dinner. You came for me." Alessandro didn't deny it. He stood tall, the darkness of the city framing him. "I came to see if Arthur Dubois' daughter was worth the trouble," he said calmly. "And?" Sophie challenged, tears welling up. Am I? Alessandro walked over to her. He didn't stop until his chest brushed hers. He looked down, his eyes burning with a mixture of possessiveness and something that looked dangerously like affection. Read the menu, Sophie, he whispered, echoing the night's beginning. You are worth, he said, his voice rough, burning the whole world down. The private jet touched down on a private airstrip outside Marseille, just as the sun began to bleed over the horizon, painting the French countryside in bruised purples and golds. They didn't speak much during the flight. Alessandro spent most of it on his encrypted satellite phone, barking orders in Italian to his soldiers back in New York and coordinating a strike team in Tuscany. Sophie spent the time staring out the window, twisting the fabric of her borrowed leggings, her mind a war zone of memories. A nondescript rental car, a dusty Peugeot, waited for them. Alessandro drove. He drove like he did everything else, with precision and aggressive confidence. We are close, Sophie said after an hour of winding roads lined with cypress trees. Turn left at the next crossroads. The pavement ends there. They turned onto a gravel track. The sign, half-eaten by ivy, read Château du Bois. The estate was a skeleton of its former self. The main house, once a sprawling manor of warm yellow stone, was boarded up, the roof sagging. But the vineyard was wild. Vines that had once produced award-winning Syrah were now tangled, thorny thickets choking the life out of the soil. Stop here, Sophie whispered. We have to walk. The engine noise will carry. Alessandro killed the engine. He reached into the back seat and pulled out a duffel bag. He handed Sophie a flashlight, but kept his hand on his holster. Stay behind me. If you see anyone, you drop to the ground. Do not scream. Do not run. Understand? I grew up playing hide-and-seek in these rows, Alessandro, Sophie said, stepping out into the cool morning air. The smell of wild thyme and damp earth hit her, making her chest ache. I know how to disappear here. They moved through the overgrown rows. The silence was heavy, broken only by the crunch of dry leaves under their boots. The garden wall is on the north side, Sophie directed. They reached the old stone wall that bordered the property. It was covered in moss. Sophie counted the stones, her breath trembling. 1, 2, 3. Here. She pointed to a large, flat river stone near the base. The 9th stone. Alessandro knelt. He pulled a knife from his boot and wedged it under the stone. With a grunt of effort, he levered it up. Underneath, nestled in the dirt, was a rusted tin box. A biscuit tin. Sophie fell to her knees and grabbed it. Her hands shook so hard she couldn't pry the lid off. Alessandro's large hands covered hers. Let me. He popped the lid. Inside, the smell of stale paper wafted out. There were childhood trinkets, a dried flower, a toy soldier, a drawing of a horse, and, taped to the bottom of the tin, a silver USB drive. He did it, Sophie whispered, tears spilling over. He really hid it here. Secure it, Alessandro said, his eyes scanning the tree line. We have what we need. Now we... Click. The sound was unmistakable. The cocking of a hammer. Don't move, a voice sneered from the darkness of the vines. And drop the gun, Moretti, unless you want the girl's brains to fertilize the grapes. Alessandro went rigid. Slowly he raised his hands. Out of the shadows stepped 3 men. The leader was a mountain of muscle, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. He held a suppressed MP5 submachine gun pointed directly at Sophie's chest. Luca, Alessandro greeted him, his voice casually bored. I see Greco let you off your leash. He knew you'd come for the girl's heritage, Luca grinned. Hand over the drive. Or what? Alessandro asked. Or I kill her, take the drive, and leave you here for the crows. Alessandro looked at Sophie. His eyes communicated a silent message. Trust me. Fine, Alessandro said. He reached into the tin, grabbed the drive, and held it up. The silver glinted in the dawn light. You want it? Catch. Alessandro tossed the drive high into the air, toward the dense thicket of thorns to his right. Luca's eyes instinctively followed the arc of the silver object. That split second was all Alessandro needed. He didn't go for his gun. He lunged at Sophie, tackling her into the dirt behind the stone wall just as Luca pulled the trigger. Bullets chipped the stone inches above their heads. "Stay down!" Alessandro roared. He rolled onto his back, drawing his pistol in one fluid motion, and fired blindly over the wall. A scream echoed. One of the henchmen went down. "Get to the vines!" Alessandro commanded, grabbing Sophie's collar and dragging her into the thick cover of the overgrown grapes. They scrambled on hands and knees through the dirt, thorns tearing at Sophie's clothes and skin. Behind them, heavy footsteps crunched. "Spread out! Find them!" Luca shouted. "The drive!" Sophie hissed, panic gripping her. "You threw it away!" "I threw the toy soldier," Alessandro gritted out, reloading his clip as they huddled behind a thick, gnarled trunk. He tapped his chest pocket. "The drive is right here." Sophie stared at him. "You are insane." "I am practical. Now listen. I'm going to draw their fire. You run for the car. Do not look back." "No." Sophie grabbed his arm. "I'm not leaving you." Alessandro looked at her. For a moment, the mask of the Don slipped, revealing a man who was terrified of losing the one thing he had just found. "Sophie, please." "They are flanking left," Sophie whispered, her ears attuned to the sounds of the vineyard she knew by heart. She pointed. "There is an old irrigation ditch 10 yards that way. It leads back to the road. We can both make it." Alessandro looked at the direction she pointed. Then he looked at her with a fierce grin. "Lead the way, mademoiselle." They moved together, a synchronized unit. They slid into the dry ditch just as bullets shredded the vines where they had been standing. They ran low, lungs burning, until the car came into view. Alessandro vaulted into the driver's seat, Sophie into the passenger. He gunned the engine, spinning the car around in a spray of gravel just as Luca burst from the tree line, firing wildly. The rear windshield shattered. Sophie screamed, ducking. Alessandro slammed the car into gear and floored it. The Peugeot roared down the dirt track, leaving the gunman in the dust. "Are you hit?" Alessandro shouted over the wind rushing through the broken window. "No!" Sophie checked herself. She was bleeding from thorn scratches, but no bullet holes. She looked at Alessandro. He was grinning. A wild, adrenaline-fueled grin. "You did good, Sophie," he laughed. "You did very good." Sophie looked at the man beside her. Dangerous, lethal, and currently the most exhilarating thing she had ever known. "To Tuscany?" she asked, her voice steadying. Alessandro's grin faded, replaced by cold determination. "To Tuscany. To kill a monster." Stefano Greco's villa was a fortress built on blood money, nestled in the rolling hills of Tuscany. It was beautiful, ancient, and rotting from the inside out. Night had fallen by the time Alessandro and Sophie arrived. They didn't sneak in this time. They drove right up to the front gate in a black Mercedes that Alessandro's contacts had provided. Alessandro wore a fresh suit, black on black. Sophie wore a red dress, not the cheap uniform from L'Étoile Noire, but a silk gown Alessandro had procured in Florence. She looked like a queen. She felt like a sacrifice. "Remember the plan," Alessandro said as the iron gates groaned open. "You are the leverage. I am the buyer. We do not show fear." "I'm not afraid," Sophie lied. "Good, because Greco feeds on fear." They were escorted by armed guards into the main hall. It was a cavernous room filled with Renaissance art and distinct smell of sulphur. Stefano Greco sat at the head of a long banquet table. He was a small, oily man with dead eyes and a smile that showed too many gums. "Alessandro!" Greco spread his arms wide. "And the little waitress. Welcome, welcome. I trust the flight was comfortable?" "Cut the pleasantries, Stefano," Alessandro said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. He didn't sit. He stood behind Sophie's chair, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "We have the drive." "Do you?" Greco sipped his wine. "Show me." Alessandro pulled the silver USB from his pocket and placed it on the table. "Arthur Dubois, now." Greco snapped his fingers. A side door opened. 2 guards dragged a man in. Sophie gasped. "Papa!" Arthur Dubois was a shell of the man he used to be. Gaunt, bruised, one eye swollen shut. He stumbled, barely able to walk. "Sophie!" Arthur croaked, lifting his head. "No, no, Sophie, run! Let him go!" Sophie demanded, starting to rise. Alessandro's hand held her down firmly. "The drive first," Greco smiled. He picked up the USB. He plugged it into a laptop sitting on the table. He typed for a moment. Then he frowned. "It's encrypted," Greco spat. "Biometric lock. Voice recognition." He looked at Sophie. "Clever Arthur," Greco sneered. "He made his daughter the password." Alessandro tightened his grip on Sophie's shoulder. "She will unlock it. Once Arthur is in the car and halfway to the airport," Greco laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. "You are in no position to bargain, boy. I have 50 men on these grounds. You have a waitress." Greco pulled a gun from under the table and pointed it at Arthur's head. "Unlock the drive, Sophie, or Daddy paints the wall." "No!" Sophie screamed. "Do it!" Greco cocked the hammer. Sophie looked at Alessandro. His face was unreadable, a mask of stone. But his hand on her shoulder squeezed twice. A signal. Sophie stood up. She walked toward the laptop at the other end of the table. She felt the eyes of every guard on her. She leaned over the computer. The prompt on the screen asked for a voice phrase. She looked Greco in the eye. "You want the code?" she asked. "I want the world, my dear." "Give it to me." Sophie leaned into the microphone. "The fox knows many tricks," she spoke clearly in French, "but the hedgehog knows one big one." The screen flashed green. Access granted. Files began to scroll. Bank accounts, routing numbers, the blueprint to the entire syndicate. Greco's eyes went wide with greed. "Yes, yes, it's all here." He looked up at his guards. "Kill them. All of them." Sophie froze. "A deal is a deal, Stefano," Alessandro said, his voice dropping to a terrifying growl. "I'm a criminal, Alessandro," Greco laughed, distracted by the screen. "I don't make deals, I make corpses." "So do I," Alessandro said. And then the lights went out. Total darkness. Then chaos. Alessandro moved before the lights even fully died. He had cut the main power line via a remote trigger in his pocket. A timer set the moment Sophie spoke the code. In the pitch black, gunfire erupted. Alessandro tackled Sophie, shielding her body as he fired 3 shots in the direction of Greco's guards. He had night vision contacts. They did not. "Get Arthur!" Alessandro roared. Sophie scrambled on the floor, crawling toward where her father had fallen. "Papa, papa!" She found his frail hand. "I've got you." "Sophie," Arthur wheezed. "Go. Not without you." Suddenly the emergency lights flickered on. Dim, red, bathing the room in the color of blood. Alessandro was a blur of motion. He was fighting 2 guards at once, his movements efficient and brutal. He disarmed one, used him as a shield against the other, and cleared the path. But Greco was gone. The laptop was gone. "He ran!" Alessandro shouted. "Take your father to the car. Dante is waiting at the back gate." "Where are you going?" Sophie screamed, hauling her father up. "To finish it." Alessandro turned and sprinted toward the side door. Sophie dragged her father through the chaos, dodging overturning tables. They burst into the courtyard where the Mercedes was waiting. Dante, the loyal bodyguard, was there, firing cover fire. "Get in!" Dante yelled. Sophie shoved her father into the back seat. But she didn't get in. She looked back at the villa, at the sound of gunshots. "Go!" Sophie slammed the door. "Get him to safety." "Sophie, no!" Arthur screamed from inside. "Drive, Dante," Sophie ordered. The car sped off. Sophie turned and ran back into the villa. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She wasn't a victim. She was a woman in love with a king, and she wouldn't let him die alone. She found them in the library. Greco was pinned behind a heavy oak desk, clutching the laptop. Alessandro was behind a marble pillar, his ammo clearly low. "It's over, Alessandro!" Greco shouted. "I have the accounts. I'm transferring the funds right now." "You have nothing," Alessandro yelled back. Sophie saw Greco's finger hovering over the enter key. She scanned the room. She saw a heavy bronze bust of Julius Caesar on a shelf above Greco's head. The shelf was held up by a single wooden bracket. Sophie didn't have a gun. She had a bottle of wine she had grabbed from the banquet table. A heavy Magnum bottle. She didn't think. She acted. She threw the bottle with all her might. It wasn't aimed at Greco. It was aimed at the bracket. The bottle smashed into the wood. The bracket snapped. The bronze bust plummeted. It crashed onto Greco's arm with a sickening crunch. Greco screamed, dropping the laptop. The gun skittered away. Alessandro stepped out from the pillar. He didn't hesitate. He raised his gun and fired one single final shot. Stefano Greco slumped forward. Silence reclaimed the room. Alessandro stood there, chest heaving. He looked at the dead man, then at the laptop, then at Sophie standing in the doorway, panting, her red dress torn, her hands empty. He walked over to her. He didn't say a word. He grabbed her face in his hands and kissed her. It was a kiss of survival, of adrenaline, of absolute possession. It tasted of blood and victory. He pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. "I told you to get in the car," he whispered roughly. "I don't take orders well," Sophie whispered back. "I'm French." Alessandro let out a breathy laugh. He looked over at the laptop. "He didn't transfer the money, did he?" Sophie asked. "No," Alessandro said, "because the code you gave him didn't unlock the funds. It uploaded a virus that just wiped every server he owns. He died broke." Sophie smiled. "The hedgehog knows one big trick." Alessandro picked her up in his arms, ignoring her protests. "Let's go home, Sophie. I'm starving." 6 months later. The rain in Manhattan was soft this time. Inside L'Etoile Noire, the atmosphere was buzzing. The restaurant was under new management. Sophie moved through the tables, not as a servant, but as the owner. She wore a tailored suit, her head held high. She stopped at table 4. Arthur Dubois sat there, looking healthy, sipping a tea, reading a newspaper. He smiled at his daughter. "The inventory is done, Papa," Sophie said, kissing his cheek. "Good, go. He is waiting." Sophie walked to the back, to the private booth. Alessandro Moretti sat there. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He wore a casual sweater, looking younger, lighter. The darkness in his eyes had been replaced by a steady warmth. On the table sat a bottle of wine. "Chateau Mouton Rothschild, 1982, Sophie noted, sitting down. "A bold choice." "I'm celebrating," Alessandro said. "What are we celebrating?" Alessandro reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a gun. He didn't pull out a drive. He placed a small velvet box on the table. "I finally found someone who can read the menu," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. "And I don't intend to ever let her dine alone again." Sophie looked at the box, then at him. "Is that a command, Mr. Moretti?" "It's a proposal, Sophie." Sophie smiled, the same smile that had brought an empire to its knees. She reached for the wine glass. "Then pour the wine, Alessandro. We have a lot to discuss." And that is how Sophie Dubois went from the invisible girl at table 4 to the queen of the New York underworld. She proved that power isn't about muscles or guns. It's about intelligence, courage, and knowing exactly which wine to pair with revenge. Alessandro Moretti thought he was saving her, but in the end, she was the one who saved him. If you loved this story of danger, romance, and sweet justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story. And tell me in the comments if you were Sophie